I'm gonna be honest. In all the time I've dealt with the portability agreement, I actually didn't know that. I've probably read it 100 times, but it's never stuck because I don't think I've ever had it come up. All right, Chuck, we haven't done one of our podcasts in a little while. We've had quite a few things go on since recording our last one. Just some small things like, the first ever virtual NECA convention, virtual safety conference, and who knows what else virtual went on. I'm probably just forgetting it at this point.
Yeah, virtual CIR.
That's true. Yeah. Not only have we had 2 virtual sessions of CIR, we're getting ready to have our 3rd one. And so far, so good. Every time I say that, I'm reminded of the guy falling off the building, and that's what people hear him say all the way down is so far so good. But yeah, so obviously a little bit going on, but we needed to get back together because labor relations never sleeps. There's always issues going on around the country, and especially when our contractors start to move around the country, and they do that through portability. So I figured, why not talk about it today?
Yeah.
We can run through what it is, where it came from, how it's maybe evolved a little throughout, some of the agreements that are attached to it, some of the common issues we see, as well as maybe some little known facts about it, because that's what we're good for, is turning up things that people either forgot or didn't know in the first place. So how about we just dive right into it? You obviously being the keeper of all the knowledge. I can see a stack of papers there behind you. Portability as we know it and our collective bargaining agreements, how did it come about? How did it become, part of Category 1 language?
There was no formal portability provision until 1959. Now, seemingly there were formal and informal arrangements between local unions to allow the brothers to move back and forth. And then I am supposing that they had agreements that allowed contractors to send people into a local area, which is slightly different. At any rate, in 59, at the request of NECA, the international president, Gordon Freeman, issued a policy which created the one man per jurisdiction rule, which existed from 59 until 1993, when the current language, which allowed 4 men to move from one area to another. So that was negotiated in 93. And it's interesting, I pulled out the chapter alert that went out at that point, and it was kind of prophetic in a couple of its passages. The conditions of the agreement represent a significant change for some in our industry, and we should be conscious of the economic and political climate in a given local area as the agreement is utilized. The agreement is not intended to move manpower needlessly, but rather it should be used to increase our efficiency and to address the competitive requirements of the marketplace. While there are no limitations beyond its written intent, interpretations will certainly arise, and we must resist the temptation to push the agreement beyond its intended purposes and limits. If we approach the agreement with reason and do not move manpower unnecessarily, then the agreement will prove to be a great benefit for our industry. Conversely, if we use this agreement in a confrontational manner, bad feelings and resistance will be increased, while its implementation and effectiveness will be slowed. And sure enough, 3 years later, NECA got a letter from the IBEW with a series of complaints about how contractors are misusing the agreement. And the amended portability agreement was negotiated. It added a requirement that employers consider the unemployment situation in the local union. So now if you're trying to send someone into an area that has 10% unemployment, you can only send 2 workers in, then you have to hire one locally, then you can send another worker, hire another one locally, and send the 4th worker. Under the original agreement, you could send 4.
How, I guess the question to ask is, how is that unemployment defined, though, whenever you're looking into the local area? Because I thought it was 10% of who was available to work, not necessarily of all who was on the book. Am I interpreting that right?
That's the way it's supposed to be.
Okay.
Nika argued and the IBEW conceded that not everybody on the book is available to work. So it's supposed to be determined with a little more than saying, I got 3,000 members, 300 guys on the book, I'm at 10% unemployment. When you look into it and find that 275 of them are not available to work.
If you went that route, that would always be in effect. Every local would have 10% unemployment.
Yeah, pretty much. But the other change was interesting and it kind of exposed some games that were being played. Although the agreement always said the person you were transferring had to be an employee of the company, there were no real parameters for that, no definition. And it was alleged that employers were hiring off their local referral book and immediately sending people into another jurisdiction. And the receiving local unions were saying they could just as well hire out of my local because the premise is contractor is sending an individual who is familiar with the company and their work so that it can be a smoother process when they get to where the job is. So that's what brought up the 2-week employment rule, that you have to have been, or the individual has to have been employed by the contractor for at least 2 weeks before a transfer can be made.
I'm gonna be honest, in all the time I've dealt with the portability agreement, I actually didn't know that. I've probably read it 100 times, but it's never stuck because I don't think I've ever had it come up. I mean, I'm sure you've probably run into it from time to time. But yeah, so hey, I learned something. Awesome. Hopefully, hopefully everybody watching.
Hope you learned it.
Yeah. No, I got it. It's up there now, and hopefully somebody just learned it too. So it's not just me getting educated here.
So now we have, since 1996, this one agreement on portability. It's actually 2 phases. So there's the 4-man, 4-worker per jurisdiction by a single employer. In addition to that is the lesser used service and specialty work provision, which allows 2 workers per job to be transferred into another jurisdiction, and they don't count against the 4-worker general exemption or provision. So an employer could have 4 people in the jurisdiction doing work on a new construction project, have a customer in that jurisdiction call him to do specialty work, then he could send 2 more people in to do that specialty work, even though he has 4 people under the provision A, if you want to call it that. People, both on our side and the IBEW side, sometimes lose track of that and say, no, it's 4 total ever under any circumstances, and that's not true.
Yeah, so you know what question I'm about to ask. What's specialty work?
Specialty work, as a Supreme Court justice once said about pornography,
I knew this was coming.
is, I can't tell you what it is, but I know it when I see it.
That's fair.
There were some arrangements for portability, which I mentioned before, even under the original 1-worker rule. A lot like the international specialty agreements now, there were local arrangements. And it wasn't the intent of this agreement to change those definitions where they existed. And the other part of it was specialty work may vary in different locations around the country. So rather than try to write a definition that wasn't going to be universal because it could not be universal, it was left to the local parties to decide what is specialty work.
the true test to is it specialty work in your area, or at least a good test, or can anybody refer to that employer off the books perform that work, or do they have to literally have a special skill certification or training that you could, I guess, going back to your definition from the Supreme Court justice, that you know when you see it, it's this individual has this special skill, knowledge, certification, or training. And so that's why we have to bring this individual in to perform this very specific scope of work.
Yeah, a lot of this is, it's not new construction. And it's not even that a journeyman in that local might know general principles of a certain product or putting in a certain system. And if he was on a new construction site, he could get it in and that'd be okay. But this is geared more towards familiarity. This individual worker does it all the time. That is his specialty. This he does in a special way or with 20 years of experience. Another journeyman could do it, but it might take him 3 days to do what this guy can do in 1 day. There had to be some leeway. As you can see from this discussion, we can't even decide how you would build the definition, let alone what that definition is.
We could probably have an entire podcast trying to craft it.
We could, but it would be pointless because at the end we'd have nothing.
That's not only fair, but depressing because it's true. Yeah. An interesting scenario I had come up with the whole special skills and porting individuals because they had these special skills. And I believe this actually fits into this vague definition that we're sitting here crafting. I had a scenario one time where I had an employer tear down a machine in his jurisdiction. So no portability there, right? But he had a small group of individuals, and he needed a few of the, I guess, the more leadership roles from that team to go with this now torn down machine and rebuild it like 1,000 miles away. Well, that fell right under it because you're not going to go pull just anybody off the books in that local because they literally did not tear down this machine. It was a highly specialized piece of equipment. And the customer said, I want this person and this person or whoever it was to follow that machine and put it together on my site, here and there. And I mean, I had no issue with it. The employer explained it to me. I called the other area. We had a quick chat and they go, oh yeah, that won't be a problem at all. We completely understand. But I guess that goes to that points to why it is difficult, because how often are you going to run into that scenario? But yet it fits. Speaking of the portability agreement, let's talk about the scenario where you have an employer that has two permanent locations in, we'll say, local A and local B. What does the portability agreement say about that? Can that employer transport between those two shops?
No.
Yeah. Pretty simple answer.
Well, it's simple because it is simple. If you can't transport people between a local area where you have a shop into another local area where you have a shop, that's just not permitted.
Was there other than it makes sense, was there any reasoning behind that?
Well, the reason is that portability is provided to give the employer the benefit of using current employees who know the company and how it does things, and the job that they're going to do. You can move them into an area where you don't have any infrastructure, as it were, so that the employer has more comfort in seeking work in other areas because he knows at least the core of the people that he's going to be sending in to do the work. He's already got a permanent office in an area. He can just as well use those people because they know the company. They know how things are done within that company. So they should be perfectly adequate to, for lack of a better term, protect the employer's interests in that jurisdiction.
No, it makes it fun. But since we're talking about the infamous local A and local B, let's talk about their lesser known cousin, local C.
Yes.
Yeah. Nobody likes to talk about local C, but we're going to have to. So, the scenario that was brought to me the other day, and I thought it'd be a good one for us to talk about here, is you have a contractor who has a permanent place of business in local A, and they have, let's say, two individuals, so that this works in all the scenarios. They have two individuals that they want to use under the portability agreement to move from local A to local B. They
Okay.
can do that even with the even if there's unemployment in local B, they can still do that because it's two. So they do. And while they're in local B, they get an individual referred to them from local B's book, and they really like this individual. And now they have a job in local C. So they want to bring their local A guys from into local C to do this job. But they also like this new guy that they had referred to them in local B. So they want to bring that individual as well. Can they do that?
No.
And it's because they can only bring the individuals from local A because that's how portability was established to work. It wasn't to hopscotch, so to speak.
Right. It was premised on that contractor getting work, taking permanent, regular employees where the home office is and sending them off to do work in an area where they had no presence. You have to remember the IBEW structure, local union autonomy in their various jurisdictions, and the idea that an employer could just start going around the country cherry picking from local unions and using that crew to the detriment of his home local. Because if he's picking up people from local B or local D and sending them into local C rather than sending local A people, that doesn't really fit the idea or the argument that the employer needs the people that he's had who really understand him, because those people came from local A or would come from local A. Now, it's important in this discussion to point out these aren't people who are necessarily members of local A. They're people who were referred to the employer by local A. So he can't pick up somebody in local B and send them to local C. However, if he gets a book two guy from local B sent to him in local A, and that guy works for him for 2 weeks, he could then send that individual to local C because it's the point of referral and not the membership that counts.
Yeah, I like that distinction, and that's something, like you said, that we often forget, that it's not the membership of the individual; it's the referral. Something that I'm kind of putting together from, because you've said it quite a few times, and I think is important to note is the reason for portability. So often, as a chapter manager, especially when you run into issues with portability, it's because a contractor wants to move an individual because they like that individual, or because they like their work ethic, or fill in the blank reason. But that's not what portability exists for. It exists to be able to move an individual who is familiar with the company's operation. And while those two may be the same, you can't port somebody just because you like them. The reason it exists is to be able to bring those long-term employees that know the company, know the culture, know the job, know whatever the fill in the blank is, to move them from point to point. It's not just because you snagged an individual that you just like their work ethic or you just like them, so you want to bring them around. It's possible to do that, but that's when they have to do it in the scenario like you just said. That's an important distinction, that portability exists to keep continuity, to keep that company knowledge and culture when moving into areas where the company doesn't have a presence. It's not just because you want to move an individual that you like. And one thing that I can note, if there are employers listening to this, is if you are in a situation where you need to move more than those four people from one place to another, the best advice I can give you is, first of all, contact your chapter manager and tell them what's going on, because 9.9 times out of 10, that chapter manager knows the chapter manager in the jurisdiction where you're needing to go. They can make one phone call, and usually between the relationship that chapter manager has in that area with their business manager, and then the relationship between the two chapter managers, they can work something out. I can't really recall a situation where we weren't able to come to some type of an arrangement to help the employer get their job done, to be able to have what they needed to, fulfill that customer's requirements in that area. Now, I don't say that to make a promise that you're going to get it every time, that you're just going to get full portability. All you have to do is call, but you have a much better chance of being able to bring who you need to do the job you need to do by making that call first.
There were a couple of things I had in mind to bring up. One is the question: the employer has sent people into another jurisdiction and they get a visit on the job site, or the contractor gets a phone call claiming that those individuals can't work until they come to the union hall and get referred out or get a permit to work. That's not required. You send them in. The employer is required to notify that local union that these people have come into the jurisdiction and they're working on a particular job, but that's all. Those individuals do not have to physically report to the local.
That's a good one to bring up, because I have run into that scenario quite a few times. Yeah, some locals can be difficult to work with, and they like to put on those requirements. And it's especially hard when you have an employer that they're going into a local union that has a very large geographical jurisdiction, and there's a remote job site and they need the individuals to go to that job site. But then the local says, no, you got to run them through the hall, which is, 4 hours out of the way. And then you got to drive the 4 hours out to the job site. And so it's good to know that if that requirement gets brought up, that the employer doesn't have to send those individuals to the hall. They just have to provide the information to the hall to let them know, here's who we're bringing in. That way, you don't have an additional 4 hours of drive time.
If you send people into an area that has a reverse layoff clause in the referral, which requires that you have to lay off by book, does it affect people brought in under portability? The answer is no. If you send 4 people in and you then hire a bunch of local people and they're all group 1, and then you start to have a layoff, can the union say, well, they're from out of town, so they're no better than book 2? You have to lay your transferred workers off first before you can lay off any of my book 1 guys. And that's incorrect. The purpose of portability was to have familiar workers to help start and complete the job. And that also is in the Q&A.
Well, I think it's probably a good time for us to put a bow on this portability discussion. I think we've probably hit a good bit of it. I'm sure there'll be questions. If you watch this and you take exception to anything we say, be sure to send them all to Chuck. He'll take care of all that for you. But seriously, if you do have questions about portability, you have a unique scenario maybe we didn't discuss, or you just want to hear us talk more about portability, feel free to reach out. Chapter managers, contact your field rep with any questions. They can reach us that way. I'm more than happy to hop on a call with you and have this discussion and, go through any of your scenarios or issues you may be having. And if there's more you want to hear us talk about in this realm, send it over to me, and Chuck and I can look at doing a future recording where we, go through your issue or go through your particular scenario. But Chuck, I just want to say thank you again for coming on and lending us some more knowledge on the history and application and the ins and outs of portability. Did you like that pun? Ins and outs?
Portability. Yeah, that's great.
Well, hopefully we've shed some light on it. And again, any questions, let us know. Chuck, you have a great afternoon. I'm going to try to do the same, and we'll see everybody on the next one. Have a good day.